Hey there. So today we're going to talk about how the essentiality of labor does not contribute or it does not correlate strongly with the wages earned from engaging in it. I don't think I've gotten to use the word essentiality in a sentence before, but here we are. A little exciting. So the pandemic introduced this idea of a category of work called essential labor, right? And it includes doctors, teachers, people in the distribution chain, and notably for like food service at every single like level of the production, distribution, preparation, delivery, like all of that is included in essential labor because somewhat obviously you need food to live. And so a lot of these jobs are, despite being labeled as essential, don't pay very much. A lot of them pay minimum wage. And some of them pay a lot. Like being a doctor pays a lot. And it sort of raises a bit of a question of if labor is essential, why does it get paid so little? Which is a fair question, but there's a somewhat obvious answer, right? Which is that, and this is a question that gets raised a lot in a book I recently read called "The New Possible." But the answer is, some of the labor is highly skilled and technical and requires a long time to be able to do. Like being a doctor takes like over a decade of study, right? Including college, med school, residency, all that. And being a food prep takes like a day. And so, well, not a day, I don't think, for food prep. But some of the jobs involved in like that pay minimum wage in the food distribution and all that, they just require basically no skill. And so certainly you do things better with skill, but the point is you don't need to go to school for a decade. And having skill gives you leverage when negotiating your wage, or it gives your entire industry leverage. Because if the doctor doesn't want to work for anything less than 200,000, let's say, then you you can tell them to take a walk, but there aren't that many people like willing to fill your spot, and so you need to increase the wage. As far as like minimum wage, like McDonald's workers, although it's been a bit of a problem for McDonald's recently getting labor, for the most part, if someone well, not unlimited, but there's a lot of unskilled labor, and because of that, if someone doesn't want to work for you, and you are paying minimum wage, you can have them take a walk, and then you can try and hire someone else, as long as the job you're trying to fill doesn't require skill. And so, I think it's important to make this distinction that it is not the how important the labor is to society that determines how much it gets paid. It's your ability to negotiate a higher wage, right? It's the leverage you have, and you don't acquire leverage by being part of a population that there is just an excess of. There's an excess of supply of unskilled labor, and so that pushes the wages of unskilled labor down. There's a high demand for skilled labor, pushes the wage up, right? And so the mechanism is not the importance to society that drives the wage. It is the supply and demand thing, which is, how capitalism works. There's some good to this, pretty obviously, because it incentivizes people to become doctors. Becoming a doctor is a huge pain. It requires a lot of effort. Sorry about that. And it's like, if no one wanted to become a doctor, that would be a bit of a problem. And so, also, if being a doctor paid minimum wage, only rich people could do it, because it requires a ton of money to go through college and med school, and you're not going to do that expecting a minimum wage at the end. So there would be just like way not enough doctors if being a doctor paid minimum wage. It would just be people who want to do it that just have gobs of money and they just feel like doing it because it wouldn't make sense to do it. So it circling back though, it's sort of it's a little unsettling that something can be called essential and then be paid the absolute minimum, right? Where I think of like the meatpacking plants. Now, I'm not certain if they should have been forced to stay open or closed, but there were a lot of people early on in the pandemic who were dying in meatpacking plants and were still forced to go to work or get terminated despite like health risks and stuff. And it's this labor is so important we're willing to risk lives for it, but it's not so important we're gonna pay you more than minimum wage for it. Although I don't know how much meatpacking plants specifically earn. I'm just talking in a general sense. And it's this it comes back down to supply and demand. If there's just a glut, a huge excess of something, it's kind of expendable, right? But human life is maybe not perhaps essential labor should have a higher minimum wage or something like that, to as a function of saying, okay, this is important to society, we are going to make it more expensive just because it's important to society, which is obviously from an economics perspective, that would produce inefficiency, right? Because there would become a higher supply of people who are interested in doing essential labor, and the equilibriums would change. It would create deadweight loss to society in terms of like thinking about it economically. But when you have a system that is entirely based on negotiation for determining the price of labor, everything becomes about leverage and not about like, let's call it true value, but I'm uncertain there is such a thing as true value. But if we're going to dub something as essential, there's another thing that I think of in particular with this sort of stuff is teachers. And this is almost everyone, like pretty across the board, people think education's important. But by and large, teachers, they get paid okay, but they don't get paid a lot. And I think one of the reasons is they do not have a lot of leverage with which to negotiate because so many people want to be teachers, right? There's an excess supply of people who want to be teachers because it's rewarding work, right? And in some sense, you get paid in things other than money, right? You get paid in having a job that is perhaps more satisfying and fulfilling, right? So perhaps the salary does not fully reflect what you're getting out of it, right? But consider if we just paid teachers like way more, like 50% more or double, and we just made it way more competitive, and we just got higher quality teachers by making it more competitive, right? It's already hard enough. It's already pretty hard to get a teaching job, but you could just make it harder by doing that. You know, I don't think that this is something that most people necessarily find objectionable, and it perhaps would be better for society if, 40 years down the line or 30 years down the line, if all teachers were just way more competent across the board, right? Because it takes some time for the people to grow up and eventually become members of society. But if there were just way more competent teachers, not that I'm saying current teachers aren't competent, I'm just saying you could increase the competence level by making it more competitive. If that's the case, then society is better, and that's not going to happen because there's an excess supply of teachers, right? The wages get pushed down because it's already competitive as a teacher, and so places can say, hey, take a walk, we'll just hire someone else, right? And so it's interesting to think about, okay, well, what's important to society? Like, what makes society, like, good in the long run? And stuff like having good teachers makes it good in the long run. So does having doctors, right? Not trying to knock the doctors, but it's the current mechanism, which is just based on negotiation and leverage. It creates very intense efficiency in the short run, but it doesn't have a sort of it seems like there's perhaps some long-term market failures created by the way things work, at least if you're going to couch it in economic terms. And that perhaps thinking of stuff a little bit differently might be better in terms of determining wages and thinking of value. But then, like, it all becomes rather arbitrary, which I don't like. One of the great things about the current, like, the way capitalism works is that the system creates the prices for everything just based on what people are willing to pay, right? It has allocated efficiency, which means that the right people get this, that means the right amount of people engage in each work, and it is distributive efficiency, which means that the right people get the right stuff. And if you start messing with stuff by hand arbitrarily, you decrease those efficiencies. And so an intervention to change stuff is generally pretty unappealing, but it is interesting to try and think about a way to make things so that you have more long-term, like, stuff that is good in the long term for society, like perhaps teachers getting paid more, could be a thing, or work that is labeled as essential perhaps gets paid better, or gets paid better under danger conditions, or something like that, which would involve an intervention that creates inefficiency unless there is a market failure, which is entirely possible that there is, but it's difficult to... the system doesn't necessarily have to be reflective of how people think about value, although I think that is how people think about value. It's just whatever the market decides something is worth, people think that's what it's actually worth, and that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Tesla got paid almost nothing, but his inventions contributed a ton to society, and he got paid almost nothing because he was a really bad business person, right? But his pay isn't a reflection of his contribution to society. It's his inventions, and so to say that Tesla produced very little value to society would be absurd. We're talking about the man, not the car thing, but he didn't get paid a lot. So like there's not always a correspondence between value and pay, which is largely why a big part of why I find those points interesting, and it's a big part of why I'm doing this series. Anyways, if anyone has any thoughts or any sort of comments on things that they think the wages for it do not properly correspond to the value it's provided, those would be interesting to hear in the comments. And have a good one.